Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Tahir Dhindsa. You are watching SDTV. Post-truth, AI, the machines would take over, and what is happening in this world, and how this world is going to figure up it itself. Then now, this actually physical war in Ukraine, and some say that the arena for the third world is being shifted to the Europe, and then again we come back to the education through Zoom. So there's a fundamental change which is going on from which we are passing through, and we cannot feel it, or we don't feel it because we are actually passing through. We have today with us a futurist and a professor, and I would say an independent thinker, one of the independent thinkers, Dr. Adil Najim. He's dean of the Boston University Pardee School of Futurism and one of the recognized mind that. Also, very warm welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good to
What
be
do you say about it? If you go further,
It's a very big topic. Thank you for having me. So I guess this is about sort of the talk I gave today at SDPI, and my premise was that there are what I identified as 5 fundamental changes that are happening in the world, and I set myself the challenge that are these just changes that happen like all the time? Changes are given, or is there something structural and fundamental about it? And I argue that it seems to me that there are at least 5 things that are really big enough to be called structural fundamental changes. And some of them you mentioned. The first is a power shift. And a power shift doesn't, I'm not talking about whether China rises or whether Russia is rising against the US or whether India is going to rise at some point or what happens about that. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that we are now truly out of the Cold War mode and back to a multipolar world, which is not about Cold War, but spheres of influence, but going back to an earlier time of balance of powers where you should expect not only that there are multiple poles or multiple power centers, they may not be poles, multiple power centers, but that they will keep shifting, that countries are and will remain more fluid based on their interests at a time, rather than creating deep ideological structures as we saw in the Cold War. This has many implications, including what one I think we may be seeing as, if not the end of multilateralism, certainly as the weakening of multilateralism. Anyhow, let me quickly go through. So one was power shift. The other was about climate, and that climate is a fundamental structural shift that is happening in the world. Another one that I identified is the fundamental structural shift that I see happening and many people see happening in the nature of work. In the nature of work, in the workplace, it is much more deeper than Zoom, but Zoom is, for example, one of the ways, and work from home. Yes, an icon that we are seeing it through. Then the fourth element that I identified there is what I call intelligence, but you can call it information. It's really about the rise of artificial intelligence. And we hear about it a lot in science fiction, but that's not what I'm talking about. We are now seeing it in our lives, which is more and more of the processing of information being taken over or being given to machines because they are faster at it. We do it with our phones, we do it with our life. And that many serious thinkers like Max Tegmark and others are now very seriously thinking about what does this mean for what he calls, for example, Life 3.0. And finally, the issue of democracy. And by democracy, I don't mean this government or that government, but are the tools of democracy keeping pace with the technological and changes as well as the demands of people? Between retweets and likes and essentially democracy has more voice, therefore has more noise, therefore has more demand for quicker action. And in many ways, some of the things that we might identify as problems right now are things that we are actually demanding. We are demanding populist leaders who respond more quickly to these things. We are demanding maybe even strongman leaders. And therefore, there is a fundamental question of how democracy, or the idea of democracy and the tools of democracy evolve.
So one fundamental question, I think it was Tariq Binori or someone who conducted study on the UN when he was heading that energy section and all that. And I don't clearly remember, I think he was Tariq Binori. In the study, they find out that if you hire 15 men for 15 days and make them work, the efficiency, the output they are going to give is equivalent to that if you harness energy in 1 liter of gasoline, that is equivalent to that is equivalent to, for example, with 1 liter of gasoline, diesel or something, you can break rock that 15 men would break in 15, is all that. So 1 liter of gasoline is 20 cents, 30 cents, 50 cents, it's nothing. But hiring 15 men for 15 means is $10,000. So this energy is totally free. And there was a marriage between internal combustion engine and the source of energy. That gave spur to the superpowers and the Western. Do you think that marriage, principally because of the climate change and further, it's over now? Or it is becoming over? That's why the US is feeling that malaise or something.
Yeah, it's a complex question. I don't know about that study. I think I get the point, but let me take it somewhere else. Two thoughts that come from it. I don't know the study itself, but 2 points that come to mind in what you say. One is that, we have for a long time, in terms of what is happening with AI and what is happening with knowledge, we have for a long time been able to harness machines, if you will, to do work for us. Right? And in many ways, the human story on the planet Earth is just that story. Right? We had to do things with our hands, and then we make a machine, we get a hammer, and now the hammer becomes much more efficient if I were breaking rock just with my hand. And then I get a sledgehammer, and then I get a sort of maybe hydraulic hammer, and each one of them increases efficiency. And so the relationship between work and energy, work and machines has been there. I think what people are now talking about is that we've now also begun to harness not just work and energy in that sense, but thought, nearly thought, because that's where artificial intelligence is going. But certainly, yes, creativity at some point, but certainly the ability of machines to process information. That's what your phone does. That's when you take it up and you say, Siri, what is this? And suddenly it tells you which restaurant is open right now. Right? Now, what people are really now thinking about is you take that, extrapolate that even in a very short time. How does that change life and how does that change society? It will change society. It is changing society. We already think of our machines as extensions of ourselves in many ways. But the real question is, what happens to society because of that? Now, in terms of your other question about superpowers and energy and so on and so forth, you are, I think, if I understand it right, energy and the role of energy in international politics has changed. And in many ways, I think we are still stuck in an earlier level. We are, in fact, seeing this with what's happening in Ukraine. We've seen this with what's happening with the Middle East. Like one of the things that people don't often focus on is that until recently, the US had again become the biggest oil producer in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
It always was. But not exporting.
But not exporting, right?
Yeah,
and so the point is that in many ways, this is the lesson of history, and this is what I was talking about, that in many ways, what we need to do is to think about the frameworks of tomorrow rather than the frameworks of yesterday. I would argue that some of the ways in which we understand society as well as politics are the frameworks of yesterday. For example, Cold War I mentioned. For example, I would say energy. And the reason to think about the trends that are changing is not because we're going to predict the future, but because we need to respond to different things than what used to be.
So this brings me to ask you, do you think a lot of literature is becoming irrelevant? For example, big thinkers like Toynbee and Ariel Will and Ariel Durant, the first lesson we learn from history is that we don't learn from history, he said. So do you think that literature that we had been reading in our childhood, it's fast becoming
No, not at all. Not the people you mentioned. When you mentioned, I thought you were thinking of someone else.
Okay.
But I think what is truly literature, ideas don't become redundant.
Okay.
Right? I mean, again, the talk I gave today, which is about the long-term future, I started it with a quote from Ibn Khaldun, 700 years ago. right? So the power of
But
ideas.
they were very recent, Toynbee and
Right,
they
and
were
so that's exactly right. I was
very
talking
recent.
700 years. These are now.
Maybe our contemporary, if not, I mean,
So,
idea.
what I'm saying is that the point I would like to make is ideas. The real power is not oil. It's not even AI.
It's the idea.
The power is ideas. And when you started the question, I thought you were going to talk about, which is that we have so much being written, so much by people like me. People just write and people throw stuff out. But the test of good ideas is what is going to stick. Right? And the people you mentioned, Durant or Toynbee or others, they stick. Right? The fact that you mention them,
Yeah.
right, 50 years after they have written, means that the idea has stuck. And that is the test of ideas. Now, again, the test of ideas sticking is not even that the ideas are right or wrong. Some ideas
they
are
were powerful.
right? Ideas are powerful or not powerful. Sometimes ideas may turn out to be wrong. Again, to go back to Ibn Khaldun, there are things that we read there now which don't make sense. But that's not the measure. The measure of the idea is, does the idea have the originality that it changes the thinking at that time and into the future, right? And I think what I take from your question is, I think the only thing that lasts and the only thing that is true power is ideas.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Dr. Sab. And I mean, it's so amazing that I would like to talk more and more, but because of the time, we'll talk something. And with this, we'll come to the end of this interview. We'll bring more. So please subscribe and like the channel. And if you may, please log on and give your comments so we can correct and give you other programs as you want. Goodbye.